around the Otis house, which has a very nice display there on the table. Few housekeeping items before we get started. There's refreshments on the back table, just help yourself. And there's also a guest book, if you'd be kind enough to write your name and address. Doesn't have to be your complete address, just so we know how far away you traveled to get here. Up here we have some items of interest. Anybody who would like a sticker, these are free. We all love Danby. And we have some other things, A Tale of Two Towns, where we interviewed some of our citizens a few years back. We have a book that was written by John Furman called The Generation That Spanned a Bridge, and that interviews some of the Danby people. We have reprints of the original Danby history that was written way back in 1869. We have reprints of 3 books that were done by children in the school, Danby 2 Centuries, I Remember Danby, and Danby, and this has a feature on the Otis store, which is also known as the Danby Four Corners store. So those are all available. We're also honored to have a member of the Otis family here, Wendell Otis.
Here's the cube.
And,
Three of them, actually. Yep, 3 of them.
okay. Would you introduce yourselves, ladies? Not to embarrass you, but
I am Vernon Mylott, and
Your mother.
my mom was Marion Davison, and her parents are Wendell Davison, whose mom was Alice Otis.
wonderful. And Matt?
And I am Dot Tift, and my grandmother was Alice Otis.
Well, this is great. We're so happy.
And I'm Wendell Otis Davison, better known as Odie.
Carrying on the name.
My grandmother was Alice.
Okay, well, this young man has put an awful lot of work into this, and I think we're in for a real treat, so.
So my name is Netanel Crispe. I'm 15 years old, and I'm an avid lover of history, as you can probably tell. I'm starting my 10th grade at Long Trail tomorrow, school in Dorset. I've been attending there for 3 years, and I was born in Israel, which explains my funny name. I spent most of my life in Philly, growing up there for 10 years, and however, my family and I have always wanted to move to Vermont. My father had grown up in Brattleboro, and I'm actually a 10th generation Vermonter. We've been spending our summers in Vermont for as long as I can remember, always dreaming of what it would be like to finally live up here. And we looked for a house for many years, but never found the right fit until we knew what we were looking for, a colonial house with a great history, located in the backwoods of some small town, and that's when we found it. About 3.5 years ago, my family and I moved into the Otis house here in Danby. A move that has transformed my life. I've openly pursued history and have found an unbelievable love for metal detecting, through which I've been able to connect with those who stood here before me. I would like to start by thanking everyone who has come to join me here today, and I hope you all enjoy what I have to say. Today I will be talking about the history of the Otis family in Danby, especially focusing on a few prominent members who helped shape the course of Danby's history. My dad and I have been fascinated by the immense history presented to us by the many Otis family members who have resided in our home. During our spare time, my dad and I have searched for any Otis family relics that we might be able to acquire, all of which I shall be presenting tonight. And one metal detecting find in particular that is of great interest today can be seen in this display case over there. This is a monogrammed sterling silver spoon that, although I'm no longer positive as to what the full name monogrammed is, I'm proud to say that it does have a large ode for Otis, which makes it a great piece of Otis family history. I found this in the backyard of my house, so we can be positive that it is an Otis spoon. Just have to read the other initials here. On the table over there, I've laid out all my metal detecting finds from the Otis House property that you are welcome to all look at if you so wish after the presentation. The Otis family can be traced back hundreds of years. However, today I will be focusing on just one line of many, one which began in the year 1775. Dr. David Harris Otis, better known as Harris Otis, was born in the town of Scituate, Massachusetts. Harris was born on April 4th, 1775, a date of much significance. No more than 15 days after the birth of Harris, the shot heard around the world was fired. The Battle of Lexington took place, and the fight for American independence began. Harris Otis was born the first of many children, to his parents Ephraim and Sarah Otis. Ephraim Otis was a faithful Quaker and a patriot to the core. Based on his religious beliefs, he would not fight nor bear arms. However, he put his practice of being a doctor to good use during the French and Indian War, where he served at Fort William Henry along Lake George. He was one of the lucky ones who managed to escape the Fort William Henry massacre of 1757 after the British surrendered the fort to the French. Sorry. Did I turn off?
Oh, no.
Okay. Sorry about that. So this is Ephraim Otis's house from 1732. It's the oldest surviving Otis home in America. It's located in Scituate, Massachusetts, where where Harris was born. And here is, again, this is a sketch of the house from an old book. Ephraim Otis House, Norwell, near Scituate, Massachusetts, the oldest Otis homestead in America. That still stands as a private residence to the state. Ephraim Otis's history with Fort William Henry is very interesting and has a great relationship to how we ended up moving to Danby. My family and I had spent a few years at the Fort William Henry Inn during Passover. What makes this even more significant is that it was during our last stay there when we were first introduced to Danby. We soon started looking at Danby as a potential place to live when we found the Otis house. Harris would go on to follow in his father's footsteps, eventually becoming a graduate of the medical profession at an extremely young age. Hoping to pursue a career as a physician, Harris decided to move away from home, looking for a place more suitable, a place with more opportunities than his place of birth. He wished to move to a town more suitable for a man of his profession. Harris eventually moved to Danby in 1793 at the age of 18. I'll give you an idea of what was happening in the world at the time of Harris's arrival to Danby. The French Revolution was fully underway, having started no more than 4 years before. The American Revolution ended 10 years earlier, and Vermont had only just been initiated into the Union in 1791, becoming the 14th state. The Vermont Constitution was adopted in 1793, and the first successful hot air balloon flight in the U.S. took place. Although Harris was looking for a more suitable town to make a living, he picked one that may have started out with difficulties. At the time of Harris's arrival to Danby in 1793, no more than 28 years after the first family had settled, Danby's population had already grown to roughly 1,200 residents. Amongst these many inhabitants, Danby also had 2 doctors. Harris, being the third doctor to come to such a small town, could easily have led to him facing problems in search for work, while competing with 2 other practice physicians. Harris, however, persevered and found no shortage in work while traveling over half-made roads and through the wilderness in search of a house long forgotten, hoping to help those in need. He most likely lived his first 2 years in Danby staying among friends or by earning his stay amongst different families. In 1795, Harris built his house in the town of Danby, a house that I am proud to call my home. The Otis house was built upon a hill known as Cream Hill, above the road known as Otis Road. This is a picture of our house during the winter. Here's where it's located this is a map of the Scott's map of Rutland County. This section is Danby Four Corners from 1854. As you can see up in the left, you have W. Otis for William Otis, Harris's son, who by this time Harris was no longer living, and that's where it is in relation to Danby Four Corners. Here it is again. And again, the house. With the house, Harris had purchased a land grant for roughly 1,000 acres, a decent sum for the time. for just reference, his property landed going way past behind the house and down to the pond, covering most of that section of the mountain. 1795 holds another important place in the story of the Otis family, for this was the year when Harris married his first and only wife, Sarah Rogers. These are other pictures of the house from the 90s. That's the front entrance with the original 1795 staircase. This is the living room, which is a very large room. You can see the fireplace over there, other parts of the living room. This is my dad's office, which originally served as the dining room. And this is a picture of, on the left, David Harris Otis, and his wife, Sarah Rogers. And it's the only existing photographs, as far as I know, of them, which is great to have. There's one piece of Otis family history that I have here with me today that still has me in awe. The story goes like this. So it was March 10th, roughly, and I was hanging out in my room, talking with my best friend on the phone, doing what normal teenage guys in my age do, talking about metal detecting force. When my dad just burst into my room, hopping up and down like an ape. He was in hysterics. It was hilarious. I didn't have the slightest clue what was going on. He just kept screaming, "Oh my gosh, oh my gosh." And then he finally explained. As I said before, we spend our time looking on eBay and other sites for any Danby historical relics that we may acquire for the Historical Society or for ourselves, and especially for the Otises. And he decided one day to change the search preferences on eBay from Danby to just Otis. After searching through what felt like a million different Otis refrigerators, he found right at the bottom a letter that was addressed to Dr. David Harris Otis, State of Vermont, at Danby, to be left at Post Office, Rutland. Because Danby didn't have a post office at the time, this letter was left and addressed to Rutland, Vermont, which is why it didn't come up in normal Danby searches. This is an original letter from June 26, 1797, from Ephraim Otis to his son Harris Otis, the man who built our house. It's, as far as I know, the oldest piece of Otis memorabilia that still exists, and this is the original letter. It's signed at the bottom by Ephraim Otis. It doesn't talk of anything of much historical significance other than saying what's going on with the family and hoping that Ephraim can come down for a visit sometime to the Otis house. But it was only written 2 years after the house was built. And I have right here a picture of the front cover. And this is a letter.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So, as you can see, for Dr. D. Harris Otis, 1.5 cents, State, Vermont, at Danby, to be left at Post Office, Rutland, and then it has a stamp, Boston, and says DC. The reason we found out that this letter was saved, which we actually found out in Canada, is where the seller was, is because people collect old stamps, and because of the Boston stamp on it, it was actually preserved, and that's the only reason that was saved. So you can see there, it's a folded out letter, so the back side would actually be the cover as it was folded down, with the other side being the full letter, which is just a remarkable piece of Otis family history. Although Harris was a practicing physician, he soon took up farming as a primary career, and was rather successful, to say the least. At the time of his death in 1847, at the age of 72, rather young for members of his family, Harris had left one of the largest fortunes ever accumulated in all of Danby's history, most definitely one of the greatest fortunes in the town at the time. Harris and Sarah lived happily together, having no fewer than 10 children. Harris was one of the leading Quakers in town. The Quaker faith was taken most seriously in the earlier Otis generations. Harris was a member of the Quaker Society of Friends, which, at the time of the building of a new Quaker meeting house in 1805, were the largest religious group in town. The society continued to prosper up until 1827, when a separation occurred in the society. A small group of members, titled as Orthodox Quakers, separated from the Friends. One of the leading members of the division was Harris Otis. who played a crucial part in the establishment of the Orthodox Society. The Orthodoxes had broken off from the group then known as the Hicksites. These Quakers followed the doctrine of Elias Hicks, a famous Quaker preacher who would eventually come to visit Danby in 1830. In this same year, the Orthodoxes built their first church, or meeting house. Harris, being one of the leading members of the society, was crucial in the developing and building of the church, putting in large sums of his own money to help complete it. The church didn't, however, last long. The Orthodox Society, in great lack of members and even greater need of support, were forced to discontinue their meetings and abandon their newly constructed meeting house. The Orthodox Quaker meeting house was torn down after no more than 10 years of service. In 1845, a new church was erected. However, as time passed and fewer generations were of the same faith as their ancestors, and the church began to steadily decline. Harris lived in Danby for 54 years. In that time, he accomplished some incredible things. He helped build the first Orthodox Quaker meeting house. He became one of the most prominent and successful farmers as well as men in the town, and he held multiple town offices. Harris served for many years on the board for the examination and inspection of schools and teachers, and no man ever took a greater interest in the need for education. He served as lister for 4 years, tipping man for 5, and auditor for several years, positions which were usually only presented to men of great talent. Harris Otis was a great man and was the first Otis to have been able to inhabit our small town. I'm sad to say I'm 150 or so years too young to have met him. However, the man who wrote the history and map of Danby was not, and although he may have not been able to meet the doctor himself, he was able to talk and meet with many men and women who had known him. J.C. Williams was kind enough to add a short paragraph describing the doctor in his own words, which I will read now. So I have that right here, and the books, of course, are for sale, as was said before. He was a well-educated man of superior mind, accurate scholarship, and a most amiable spirit. In refined life, he belonged to the gentlemen of the old, with a keen relish of good breeding and all the properties of refined life. He was rightly and truly educated, with a conscience sensitively alive to the distinction between right and wrong. In the use of language, great care of government was exercised, and by his courteous bearing as a gentleman, he uniformly won the respect of all. No man ever exercised a better influence over his family or children, ever receive a more gentle training than his. And in respectful remembrance, it may be truly said, as a kind and faithful husband and parent, his loss was deeply felt. As a sincere and generous friend, he will long be recollected. As a citizen, he was ever prepared and willing to be useful. Nay possessed a warm and feeling heart, was distinguished by a cheerful temper and unreserved in his daily intercourse. He was independent in his judgments and fearless in his declarations, and firm in the support of what he felt to be right. And then continues, his moral and religious life was always exemplary, and few men of so long a life have uniformly sustained an equally unblemished and spotless reputation. In the performance of all his duties, he was ever actuated by obvious Christian principles, and he was held in high esteem for his Christian virtues. He was a grand, large-hearted, great-souled man, incapable of a petty act or thought, strong and resolute when those qualities were needed, and with a great overflowing current of tenderness passing through his veins. Although having devoted the better part of his life to agriculture, yet as a learned physician, he built up and sustained a wide reputation. His prompt and kind attention to the cause of his patients, together with their confidence in his skill and integrity, acquired for him great popularity and an extensive and lucrative practice. His great scientific attainments, rigid morals, and genuine piety gave him an exalted rank in society, and as a physician, scholar, and gentleman. He will long be remembered. Dr. Otis departed this life August 8, 1847, being 72 years of age. His widow died May 24, 1864, aged 85. Beloved and mourned by all who knew her, her long life of usefulness was adorned with many Christian graces and virtues. She was a true, tender, affectionate, loving wife and mother, and her life was ever characterized by true Christian deportment. So as you can see, Harrison and his wife were truly good people who were highly respected by all who came to know them. So Harrison and his wife had many children. However, tonight I will be focusing on just two in particular, the first of which will be William Otis II. Sarah had given birth to a son in 1800 who was named William, but who unfortunately died at the age of 2 in 1802. When William Otis II was born in 1807, his parents decided to give him the same name as his deceased older brother. William, however, lived through infancy and much passed. William Otis was born on June 5, 1807, in his father's home, the Otis House. He led a respectful life, following greatly in his father's footsteps, and becoming just as prominent a member of Danby's history. William took up farming and eventually ran his father's estate. In 1830, he married his first of 4 wives, a Sarah Almy who was unable to have children and subsequently was killed by being thrown from a wagon in 1839 at the age of only 32. In 1841, William married his second wife, Delia Peck of Queensbury, New York, who later died in 1848, aged 26. From what can only be seen as natural causes. He next married his third wife, Jane, in 1850. Jane was the widow of Allen Vale of Middletown Springs. She died in 1856 at the age of 34. William married his fourth and last wife in 1859 to Miss Anne F. Mason of Glens Fall, New York. Growing up a farmer's son, William was very familiar with the labors of farm work and pursued agriculture with a full heart. Through the Otis farm, William became one of the most successful and leading farmers in town. At the age of 62, William was still active as ever, always putting his hand to work on the farm. Few men of his age performed such immense labors. Having amassed one of the largest farms in town through hard work and cunning, his farm thrived beyond comprehension. William was ranked amongst the leading dairymen of his section, becoming widely respected and known. In 1861, William manufactured and presented a most sizable cheese to President Abraham Lincoln, which the President went on to acknowledge as well as praise in the following terms. I have a copy of that letter here in the book. Executive Mansion, Washington, January 18, 1862. Dear Sir, permit me through you to return my sincere thanks to your friend and consummate, William Otis Esquire of Danby, Vermont, for the very superior and delicious cheese he had the kindness to send me in your care. Your obedient servant, Abe Lincoln. This letter is a true treasure of American history. I've not been able to come across the real letter in research. I'm not even sure if the original still exists. However, if it does ever come into the light once more, I will be sure to know. And over here, this is a picture of, again from the 90s, of our kitchen, which still exists. We have the original fireplace and the 2 beehive ovens. And this is most likely where that cheese was manufactured, that was then sent on to Abraham Lincoln. So it's a great piece of the house's history. William Otis followed in his father's footsteps as a farmer, a respectable and leading citizen, and as a Quaker. William, like his father before him, was regarded as the most amiable and respectable man, so much so that he was given the responsibility of holding multiple town offices. In 1841, William was elected town clerk and treasurer, an office he held for 8 years. He served as selectman for 5 years, lister for 2, trustee for U.S. deposit money for 3, representative to the legislature in 1848, and justice of the peace for 8 years. Throughout all these different appointed offices, it is said William served with the utmost fidelity and ability. Once more, I will go back to the writings of J.C. Williams, who undoubtedly met William Otis on more than one occasion. This is what he writes about this great man. In his business capacity and dealings, he is prompt, apt and correct, being honest and just as a man and citizen, social and winning, and in all his relations of life an estimable man. So I shortened what he had to say, but I think that really covers it, that one line. Another son of Dr. Harris Otis was Harris Foster Otis, the younger brother of William. Born in 1816 and named after his father, Harris Foster was also a great farmer and turned to farming as a lifelong career. Harris Foster married his first wife, Elizabeth H. Haviland of Queensberry, New York, in 1836, and settled on a farm in Danby. Elizabeth died soon after in 1841 at the age of 24. His next marriage was to Paulina Lapham, daughter of David Lapham. Like his father before him, he too served a great deal of town offices and was held in the highest esteem amongst the townspeople. He was a member of the Board of Selectmen 3 years, Lister 6, representative in 1849, town representative in 1849, town agent in 1852, and he served as Justice of the Peace for 5 years. He took all these responsibilities placed upon his shoulders without question, and served his numerous positions with the utmost zeal. Like his forefathers, Harris Foster was a die-hard patriot and an American to the core. Few men in town have held more political influence or possessed such successfulness in their many undertakings. In 1855, he sold his farm and moved his family to Manchester, where they lived until the spring of 1860, when he moved once more to Topeka, Kansas. Although his life in Danby had ended, he was quick to make a new life for himself in Topeka, where he soon was elected mayor. He died in Topeka a year later, in 1861, at the age of 45. His death was most unfortunate for a man of so much potential. He died after falling from a staircase. William Foster Otis is one more name that I care to share with you all today. William Foster Otis was born in 1854 to William and Jane Otis. William Foster Otis ran the Otis store located at the Danby Four Corners. So here you can see, as is shown in the book, this is a picture of the Otis store, Otis & Sons store, or the Danby Four Corners store, which he purchased after the death of William, his father, in 1889 with his inheritance, and ran it for a number of years. The exact amount I'm unsure. And yeah, that's the picture of the store from the early 1900s. He married Mary E. Otis and had one son, William Foster Otis Jr., in 1902, who died 3 years later in 1905. I have here an envelope from William Foster Otis that my dad and I found and purchased on eBay. This letter says William Foster Otis Jr. However, I've concluded that this must be to differentiate him from his father, William Otis. I will pass this around. It's returned to William Foster Otis Jr., Danby Four Corners, Vermont, not delivered within 5 days, and I believe it's from 1892 for all the stamps on it are in for the Columbus Day, 400 years, for 1492 to 1892. So I just ask that nobody takes it out of the sleeve, but please feel welcome to browse. William had another son of interest, Harris Foster Otis Jr. This is a picture of Harris Foster Otis Jr., what's called, and his wife Sarah, and his wife Sarah H. Otis. William inherited the farm, and son of William. He was the son of William Otis. He inherited the farm after William Otis passed, whereas his brother William Foster Otis inherited a large sum of money, which was used to buy the store. His wife Sarah H. Otis was born in 1857 and died in 1917. Born in 1850, he was older than his brother William Foster, and with the death of his father William in 1889, Harris Foster Jr. inherited the farm, whereas William Foster inherited money. William Foster used his money to buy the Otis store. Harris Foster inherited the dairy farm along with the Otis house. However, it is unknown if he bought out his brother's inheritance of the farm or if it was given to him outright. Either way, the inheritance created a tension and later on a rift between Harris Foster Jr. and his brother William Foster. And this rift is believed to be why William Foster and his descendants are buried in the Maple Grove Cemetery rather than the Otis Cemetery across from our house. I have another piece of Otis memorabilia that we purchased on eBay. This is the a letter, or the envelope to a letter, to to be returned to C.P. Otis, who's Charles P. Otis. He was the grandson of Dr. Harris Otis and another son of William Otis. He was born in 1846 and died in 1873 at the age of 26. Once more, I will pass this around and ask that it's not taken out of its protective sleeve, but please feel free to look. As I stated before, the Otises were some of the leading Quakers in the early days of Danby, and although they were against violence, some interesting discoveries have been made. Dr. David Harris Otis's great gravestone has a veteran's flag, and yet there are no records of him having served. Although it is doubtful Harris would have ever bared arms, it is a possibility that he followed in his father's footsteps and served for a short time as an army doctor. Harris, like his father, was a huge patriot, so this theory definitely could be true. The only war Harris would have been able to serve in would have been the War of 1812, for at the outbreak he would have been 37. It is also a possibility that he served at a time of peace. As I stated before, as new generations appeared, at a time of peace. As I stated before, as new generations appeared, the strict Quaker faith found in the older Otis generations began to dwindle and ease. This is clearly seen in the American Civil War when two of the Otis descendants enlisted and served in the Union Army. The first of these two men was Colonel John Grant Otis, the son of Harris Foster Otis and grandson of Harris Otis. The other Otis who served in the Civil War was Ephraim Phillips. Ephraim Phillips was another grandson of Harris Otis. However, he didn't retain the family name because his mother was an Otis and not his father. Harris Otis was a leading Quaker and a wealthy man. This combination brings forth an interesting suspicion. Through different research, I have concluded that there was at least one house in the town of Danby that served as a safe house on the Underground Railroad. I've also been told the Otis house was the safe house. However, that has become difficult to prove. The Otises were huge abolitionists and wealthy Quakers. This would have made it easier for them to have hidden runaway slaves than most. Being a leading Quaker in town, it would have made sense for Harris and later William to have been chosen as a safe house, to have been chosen for their home to be a safe house for runaway slaves. Other truth still remains. Underneath my father's office, which originally stood as the dining room, there's an original rock and brick room. This room has a connection point to a tunnel entrance that remains open about 300 feet from our house. I cannot prove it yet. However, it can be reasonably assumed that this tunnel was for slaves to get out if they were to be caught, allowing them to have a head start to run. Tunnels and hidden rooms are very common in Underground Railroad houses. Harris Foster Otis eventually married Sarah Howard. They had 3 daughters, Alice, Anna, and Sarah. Sarah Howard died in 1917, and Harris never remarried. Harris Foster Jr. ran the farm until his death in 1931, when he was left his 3 daughters, Alice Otis, Alice Otis married a Eugene S. Davidson, who took over running the farm. Sarah Marie Otis married Clarendon Bradford, who I was supposed to add this in, my apologies. This is a wedding invitation sent out from, from Mr. Harris F. Otis, and it's for the marriage of Sarah Marie to Clarendon Bradford when they were married, and, oh, no, that's what I was supposed to share. Okay. And Anna married Ben Locke and moved to another dairy farm on Old Route 7. After the death of her husband in 1921, Alice's son, Wendell, took over the dairy. Wendell was born in 1910 at the age of 22, 1 year after the death of Harris F. Otis, Jr. He was faced with a heartbreaking problem. In 1932, the Otis farm owned over 700 cattle and a ton of land. All was looking well, and the farm was thriving until their cows were all diagnosed with tuberculosis. This was a devastating reality. Wendell was forced to slaughter all the cows as well as burn multiple barns. And this sad occurrence resulted in the end of the Otis farm and eventually led to it being sold in 1948. From what I can piece together, the Otis house didn't get power until 1948, the year it was sold. I also had the pleasure of meeting the last living Otis descendant who ever lived in the Otis house, when it was still owned by Alice and run as a farm. Richard Otis Bradford was born to Sarah Otis and Clarendon Bradford. Him and his siblings were born in a house now owned by Smoky House Center, down past the Four Corners. Sarah, his mother, who you will all see many pictures of later, died to disease when he was about 3 years old in 1926 at the age of 37. At 95 years old, his memory isn't what it used to be, but he still recalled a little of his aunt Alice when she owned the farm after the passing of her husband. He was 4 or 5 years old at the time and spoke of how her husband died. She was running the farm and how after her husband died, she was running the farm and how she was a prim woman who wouldn't put up with nonsense. He recalls being hired to work as a farmhand in the late 30s and 40s. He told me of his stay up in the house and how the farm has deteriorated from its prior glory. He spoke proudly of his father, Sarah Otis's husband, Clarendon Bradford, my apologies, who served in World War I, and how he followed in his footsteps, serving 4 years in the Army Air Force flying B-22s during and after World War II. He recalls how they got power for the barns. He told me to generate power, they had a bull in one of the barns tied up to a spinning platform that would walk in circles to generate power. They called it the bull power, and labeled it as such on blueprints of the farm. In 1948, the Otis house was sold out of the family for the first time since its founding in 1795. The house stands today as a time capsule and as a door into the past, reminding us what it once was like to live in Danby. Richard's niece, his brother Peter's daughter, Susan Bradford, has been researching the Otis family history for over 20 years. She helped me in tremendous ways with understanding the family genealogy, as well as producing most of the pictures you all have seen today. I will now go through some of the last pictures of the Otises who lived in the house and tell you who they are and how they're related. So, this is a picture of Sarah Marie, the daughter of Harris Foster Otis, and the wife Clarendon Bradford, driving the car. If you haven't seen already on the table, I found a license plate in our yard, Vermont license plate from 1927, which, based on my knowledge of historic vehicles, this predates that and is probably from the early 20s or teens. However, you never know, maybe that was the license plate. What's it called? This is Sarah Marie Otis's high school picture. Again, she died when her son Richard was 3 years old from disease. This is her sister Ann Otis's high school picture. These are pictures of Clarendon Bradford, who served in World War I, on the left and the right, and his wife Sarah Marie in the middle at the Otis house along the side of the house. This is a picture of Alice Otis Davidson, and it says when she was born in 1885, and a picture of her husband Eugene Davidson together. Then this is a picture of Clarendon Bradford hanging. I can only assume that that's his wife Sarah and her sisters possibly, and maybe her mother, but it doesn't mention who the women on the hay are. It just says that that's him hanging. So, and this is a picture of Clarendon Bradford on sitting down there. His wife Sarah Marie Otis, and her mother Sarah Howard Otis, who is the wife of Harris Foster Otis Jr. This is a picture, and the only picture I know of Harris Foster Otis at Cream Hill. He was the last Otis man to own the house. He was the last Otis farmer that wasn't married into the family, and he's the one that inherited the farm after his father William died. This is a picture of him with their dog, and I don't know who the locate is. This is a picture of, these are pictures of Sarah, nicknamed Sally, and her older, or her sister Alice at the time. There's a few different pictures of them, and it says who's who up there. I apologize for the size of the screen. It's hard to tell what everything is. These are pictures of Anna Otis, or Sarah Otis again. This is old, these are just of Sarah. Sarah Marie, and this is a true Otis family treasure. This I got pictures of from Susan Bradford, who inherited the book. It is Anna Otis's autograph book, what's called, and it has many family members' autographs, including many people that stay in the house, and a lot of them are dated. So over here on the first, you have Anna Otis, which it was hers, but it's not dated. The second one is Sarah Otis, July 9th, 1898, who was her sister, Sarah Marie. Her mother, Sarah Howard Otis, August 17th, 1908. And her other sister, Alice Otis, July 15th, 1898. So that's just a remarkable piece of Otis family history as well, to have signatures and written messages from some of the last Otises still live in the house. And then going through, this is Sarah Marie again. Most of these pictures are of her. Just her. This is in front of the Otis house, where there used to be a marble porch on the side. This is her on the left again, in what looks like her husband's uniform, but it may just be work clothes, in 1918. And this is her with her mother, Grandma Bradford, who is Sarah Howard Bradford Otis. And this is her again, again on the left side of the house, and this on the right is her with, I assume, one of her sisters. And then this is, that's Sarah again with her oldest son Pete, or Peter. He was the older brother of Richard Otis Bradford, who I got to meet. And that's him in front of the Otis house at, I assume, 2 years old or so. And then that's him again on the left and her on the right in the garden. And just one more picture of her from 1917. Again, with a horse. And that's it. I will not be taking any questions.
Did you know that the Otis House in Cambridge, Massachusetts is the headquarters of the New England Society of Antiquities and has a number of David Harris Otis's things down there. So you might want to write to them and get to know them a little better. There's another wonderful story about Danby where when they first got their automobile, they had the only one in town. So he would drive down to the Otis Market, pick up anybody that wanted to go to Rutland, which was a 4-hour horseback ride, and drive them up to Rutland. And then they had a meeting place, and if you didn't get to the meeting place, you drove home, and you were stuck there till the next time you came up. So it was quite a situation. The Otis House in Cambridge was designed by Bulfinch, whose cousin wrote the Bulfinch book on gods and stuff like that. Now, the one in Danby is modeled after the one down there. So it's kind of a Bulfinch house off in the woods somewhere. So it's really kind of funny. There are 2 veterans of the Civil War buried in the cemetery. They came home on wooden boxes from the Battle of Gettysburg, which is really kind of a sad thing. So they were all quite, eminent characters in the community there. So.
Yeah, I know going through different genealogies, it said that Harris was a direct descendant of Edward I, and that they're related to, I believe it was John Otis, and another, I believe it was Judge Otis, who coined the phrase, taxation without representation during the Revolutionary War. So they have their families.
They came in 1840 or 1640 to the Massachusetts colony, and they married into a lot of the families that came in 1620, like the realtor. The realtor. What was his name?
Oh, Otis Andrews.
Andrus. They married into the Andrus family, and the Otises and the Andruses then got involved with some people who were in the Civil War that became a general So it was really quite an interesting family. And it turned out, I owned that house from 1988 to 1998. And a number of the pictures of the interior were
That's
from my
okay. Sorry, I didn't recognize.
right. And they, let's see, I don't know how to put this down. My late wife